Us off. I will call to order the meeting of Wenham Finance and Advisory Committee on January 3rd at 6:31 p.m. Thank you all for joining. And joining us again as well as the Wenham Finance Director, Jeff Soulard. I'd asked, Jeff would participate, of course, anyway, but there were a few things that I'd asked that he cover off for us as a follow-up to the Saturday morning budget presentations by the various departments. Um, I think you've seen on the calendar that I sent out, we've got four of these planned. This would be the first of the follow-ups where we would do somewhat of a more deeper dive into general government, which covers several categories of expense within the operating budget. And then the following week, next week, we will have public safety, I think public works. I remember this off the top of my head. Okay, yes. Next week we'll have Public Works. The following week, Library. And then later this month, we will invite the public safety officials back in to also, again, have a somewhat more in-depth discussion than we want to have on the Saturday morning if there are questions. And I think at that point, we'll have a pretty good idea of the capital requests from everyone. In fact, that is one of the agenda items today. We're getting a preview of what will be presented next week, next Tuesday, to the select board in the way of capital requests. And Jeff will cover off on that as well. First up on our agenda is, as I mentioned, kind of follow up to the discussion and presentations on Saturday. I've listed a few items here that I thought that we would have some general interest in learning more about because they are areas that are showing a greater than inflationary increase in the budgets and also ones that maybe we don't have a real firm grasp on where those increases are coming from. Unlike, for instance, the increase in the select board showing a very large increase year over year because select board has gone from 3 members to 5 members. So with that, I'm going to ask Jeff Soulard to jump in. One area of interest was just learning a little bit more what he can share, given that some of obviously the discussions around union and collective bargaining agreements are not for public consumption, which is why the select board discusses them in executive session. But share what he can so we can understand generally the process and what has been committed to in the recently negotiated contracts and when those will be coming up again. Have we lost? I don't know. He's with us. Jeff looks like is muted and also doesn't have his video on. I'm asking him to unmute. Hmm. Okay, there must be some difficulty on Jeff's end. Bear with me, guys. Yeah. Okay, I think he's dialed back in. Admitting him again into the meeting. Bev, can you hear me? Here we go.
Yep. Am I on now?
All right. Yes, you are. Yeah.
Oh,
Thanks for
not sure what was going on there. So it
figuring
sounded
that
like
out.
you wanted to start with a little bit of talk on the collective bargaining. Is that what I was hearing?
Yeah, exactly.
Okay, so I sent a couple of things a little earlier with some materials, and one of the emails had a little table just to kind of walk folks through what we have for union contracts and sort of when they're up and that sort of thing. So essentially, we have four unions. We have the police, we have the fire, and then we have two unions that are in the AFSCME union. The DPW workers and the clerks in that department are in the AFSCME union under one contract. And then more recently, the library has gone to a union structure, also using AFSCME. So you will see in the little chart that the police, fire, and the DPW contracts are all running through June 30, 2025. And then the library contract actually expires a year later on 6/30/2026. And that's just because they came into play a little bit later. So they're a year behind the other three unions that we have. Just to kind of walk through at a very high level. So the police department, the union contract is only for the police officers. It's not for the admin. So the police chief and the deputy police chief each have their own independent contract with the town of Wenham on their own. And then all of the officers fall under the police union contract, which, Steve talked a little bit about at the meeting on Saturday a few weeks ago, where, there's there are the built-in COLAs, but there are also built-in steps, for, sort of earlier in someone's career with us. They get a step increase, frequently for the first few years. And as they've been with us a longer time frame, they might go 5 years in between, steps, getting up to like 8 or 9 steps, I think. The fire department, much smaller. That really only covers the call fights, sort of a reverse setup here in Wenham. So we have a couple of full-time firefighters, and then we have part-time call firefighters. And it's actually the part-time call folks who have a union contract, and the full-time folks do not. So that's, sort of unique, I think. And then the DPW, that covers, everybody except for, the director and the foreman, I guess, there. I would say that, the contracts and talking to different folks, whether it's talking to the police chief or the DPW director, you're obviously salaries are a big part of our budget, and everybody is mindful of that. At the same time, salaries are, also the driver of actually getting things done in town, and so there's a real balance between making sure we're offering competitive salaries in each of these departments relative to the surrounding communities, while at the same time trying to hold the line, as Jeff says, to live within something close to the 2.5 Prop 2.5 levy limit that we face each year. And just as way of context, I will, as usual, make a comparison to Essex, and I can say generally across the board, pay is probably just a tick higher in Wenham in most areas. But by comparison, like the benefits in Essex are slightly better. So there's sort of a correlation there, right? You would expect, if you're Essex, if you want to pay lower sort of across the board, you have to offset that by potentially, offering better benefits at say a lower cost as a way to attract employees. In Wenham, it's a little bit more flipped. It's sort of the benefits are maybe a little more costly to the employee, in the form of co-pays and things like that. But their actual salary might be a tick higher. And so Steve talked a lot on the 16th about, we're in a contract now, and we were sort of lucky, I think, in our timing that we set a contract before inflation was high, but we were unsure of what the drivers were for that. Was it supply chain? Was it backup from COVID? Was it a lot of different things? And clearly, any of us who go to the supermarket know that inflation has continued to it's gotten better recently, but it is still more costly to do most things in your life out there. And so inflation has proved to be a more longer term thing, but we negotiated at a time, and I think we were successful in maybe having a more advantageous contract for the town based on getting into it earlier. But in the next round of negotiations, should inflation sort of stay on track, we will be looking at an environment where people can say, look at what the teachers in Andover got, or look at what the people in Woburn got here, look at what the United Auto Workers got there. It will be a much more challenging negotiation for sure the next time around. And that's sort of a high level. I don't know if you have any more specific questions, Jeff, I can try and answer.
Yeah, maybe just refresh for us what the term of these contracts are. I think I'd heard 3 years.
Run through the end of the next fiscal year. So at the end of fiscal 25, which is June 30th, 2025, the police, fire, and DPW, our main town contracts will be up. The library is 1 year behind because they unionized right after COVID. So they're a year behind, and they will actually run through the end of FY26 or June 30th, 2026.
These are 3 year. When they're negotiated, they are 3-year contracts.
3 years typically.
Really?
And they're always 3-year contracts in Essex. I know Manchester Essex School District, I think, did a 4-year contract the last time around, and that was definitely part of the negotiations where maybe they gave up a little bit more in terms of maybe some COLAs and things like that. But, as sort of an exchange for that, they said to the teachers in Manchester Essex, we'd like to buy an extra year of, sort of stability under the contract, for giving you a little bit more upfront. And I think, for a lot of folks, the reasoning there is, you're hoping the world settles down a little bit more within that 4-year period, and then you're negotiating from a stronger point by having that extra year. And that type of stuff, I think, is open to us when we go to the table again. There's nothing that says they have to be 3-year contracts. That just tends to be the norm. But maybe,
yeah.
Maybe we could do 2 years, maybe we could do 4. You just don't know. It's sort of what they, what do you give and take to get to the signed contract?
Yeah. So to bring it back to the budget book that we saw a couple of weeks ago, or received a couple of weeks ago. So the salary increase that we're seeing on the police department budget line item, for example, it's showing a 6%, 6.08% increase. That is what was committed to in the current collective bargaining agreement about a year and a half ago.
Correct.
Given that this current contract is going to run to the end of 2025, if it was 3 years. Okay.
Yeah.
I guess I was under the impression from the discussion that we had a couple of weeks ago that these were recently entered into, but it sounds like we are
The library.
midstream in all of these.
Yeah, I mean, well, if you think about it, we are exactly midstream right now, right? I mean, so the contract would have covered FY 23, 24, and 25, and we are, halfway through FY 24, so we are pretty much right smack in the middle right now.
And I think you had explained, or Steve had explained as well, that given the seniority of some of the officers, that would explain why we're seeing larger percent increases year over year, that younger officers are stepping up more rapidly to get to a more competitive wage, and then that may tend to tail off a bit.
Exactly. So if you're looking at the sort of the detail page on the salary for the police, they list sort of the steps of most of everybody basically. And so like we have one sergeant who's on the 9th step, which is I believe the highest. We have another sergeant who's on the 8th, and the other sergeant is on the 7th. So those folks are, I believe they're in a point where they're only getting a step increase every 5 years. Versus someone who's at step 2 is getting an increase every year. So instead of they're getting a COLA of 2%, and then say, the step might be another 3 or 4%. So they're coming in at 5 or 6% in total. But that being said, that person is also making say $58,000, so you're talking about 6% on $58,000 versus the person at step, 9 might be making $90,000. And even though they're getting a 2% COLA, it's a similar increase in terms of a dollar maybe, but it certainly skews that percentage, which, looks to be very out of whack with, the Prop 2.5 levy limit.
Yeah, thank you. Questions from any of the other members about where we're at with these union contracts?
I'll jump in. This is Dano. Jeff, nice to meet you. I don't know.
Yeah, nice to meet you.
Met you, but I missed the last couple meetings, and I guess I'm just going to kind of come out of left field here a little bit. The building off the contracts, because I feel like labor is the core of our budget, and the contracts are what drive the labor costs. So that's what's leading me all the way down this train to say, what is and I've also been in these planning committee meetings lately. I've been participating in the planning committee meetings as a member of the finance committee. And the planning committee is looking at, the next 10 years, the planning advisory committee, what's the next 10 years of our plan and where are we going and what's the vision? And a good amount of the discussion has to do with how do we manage our taxes? How do we grow in a way that allows people to be have reasonable tax rates that they feel good about, that work, that makes sense for their home equity, et cetera, et cetera. So that's been on my mind a lot too in this role in the finance committee. But we keep referencing the 2.5% on our team, and it sounds like a town staff, like it's a foregone conclusion, or like that our goal or expectation is that just we will continue to increase our taxes at the maximum available for the indefinite future, and above that even, because we'll have additional overrides, versus a completely different mentality, which would be, how do we minimize any incremental taxes, and ideally even in a perfect fantasy world, reduce our taxes. So just the mindset thing, I think, is what's bugging me a little bit. And so then when you get into contract negotiations, you know, at the root of our driving all of our costs is our goal to minimize the incremental expense for labor in our town, or is the goal to grow it as much as we're able to within the 2.5% limit?
I think there's sort of two parts to that, because you certainly don't set out like the target is to make sure we spend 2.5%. It's more like, that's the guardrail we're up against in terms of all the other things you're facing. You're never setting out to have an override. I mean, it does come up that, for example, if there's a change in the apportionment at the school and we see that coming and we realize we have them saying to us from the school, look, Wenham's going to see a shift in 2 years or 3 years or whatever it might be, where, your share of the school bill is going to go up, 7% or something in some year, which does happen. We're trying to plan around that and minimize things the best we can, but you're not targeting the 2.5, but I mean, the reality of your contractual obligations and things like that tend to put you up against it. But, there's also decisions around what services you want to provide. So, Wenham has made a commitment, as far as I can tell, just being here a short time, they've made a big commitment to sort of the land use department and master planning and all of those things. Well, although those all came with a cost. I mean, we're talking, those additions to the budget were, north of $50,000. So, you're trying to stay within the 2.5 and even minimize it if you can. But at the same time, if the residents are asking for certain additional services, you have two choices. You can either say, well, if land use and these type of things are important and doing a master plan is important, what other services are we willing to give up to minimize the impact of adding services? So, I mean, I think there's a balance there of what you're providing, and then sometimes the community actually wants more things, and how are you able to do that, under the constraints you already have? I mean, I think there is a perception that people just say that the goal is 2.5, that's what we have, and we're going to spend it. But I mean, I think you can see when you look at these numbers where you're basically level funding all expenses, and then you're dealing with your contractual obligations and whatever the school might give you. The 2.5 becomes a very difficult thing to even achieve. You're making cuts to even get to that in a lot of years. So I think you have to, maybe, if it's, every community faces this, but if it just is this 2.5% or more every year, at some point you have to better poll your residents to figure out what changes are you willing to make and things like that. Which I think, like some of these, like this budget package that we're talking about potentially getting in turn for a software package, it helps you tell the story of each department a little bit better. And maybe that makes it easier for residents to decide where to, make cuts and where to add and things like that. But I completely hear you what you're saying, because I've been dealing with that for, 20 years in Essex. But I don't feel any more here than I did in Essex, that we, sort of set out to, like, we are absolutely going to spend to the, as much as we can every year. You're just looking for ways to minimize that.
Jeff, I think maybe that's,
yeah. Go ahead, Dan.
Well, yeah, let me just respond real quick, David, and then I'll
get my
soapbox for a second.
Yeah.
The other part of what's informing me is I had a chance to talk to a guy on the finance committee at Swampscott who told me the story about how they, many years ago, were upside down financially. A town manager came in, really drove the dialogue, drove the conversation, really pushed on the contract negotiation, even to dig into details to be able to work things out better in their terms. They had a way different demographic than we do, but ended up 5, 7, 10 years later in a way better financial spot. And as I've been kind of beating my head against the wall, like, what are we all doing here on the finance committee? What can we really impact? It's just dawning on me tonight. Like, maybe the thing we can impact is to change the dialogue a little bit, instead of just kind of the boiling frogs or the lemmings or whatever, but to push the dialogue in a direction of how can we be more fiscally responsible, or more, not fiscally responsible, because I get the point, trade-off, Jeff, on the services versus, but to tell the town for ourselves, the way we approach the problem solving, to always look at it from the angle of, yeah, we're in a tough spot tax-wise. Our residents are ticked off. We have trouble retaining kids in schools after middle school, and people leave when their kids are out of school. Like, it's not a long-term viable option. How can we on the finance committee find a way ultimately to reduce taxes or minimize tax increase? Like, that should drive, to me, all of our thinking. How do we minimize our tax increase? If that informed our thinking and our talking, maybe that would kind of ooze out and start to change the culture and the thinking. I don't know. As opposed to, we go into things with, well, within the limit of the 2.5%, we can do X, Y, and Z. That's just the wrong way to say it.
Yeah, I agree. And I think, I would say, from my perspective, sort of jumping in halfway, sort of into the season here or whatever, I feel like, I have a lot of ideas about ways we can approach next year a little differently. It's a little tougher to, hit it this year, I think. But I mean, what I would suggest to you is you could find, the tough part of being on the finance committee, the challenging part, I think, is that it sounds good to folks that, oh, well, you're on the finance committee and you can make all this, you can have all this impact, but you really, the area of discretionary spending that you have a lot of impact on over is fairly small, because as you say, there's the contracts are already negotiated and things like that. So I would say you could, and I'd be happy to kind of talk with you a little bit offline on this about, picking certain areas or whatever, where maybe you do take that approach and say, how can we find like one department or one area that we can sort of really sort of go after and try to true up and get it right, and work the select board and the town administrator on that a little bit. Like, we're going to focus on, we're going to take, smaller bites at the apple, but try to find places where we can have an impact, the best kind of bang for our buck in a certain area. And this is, you're heading into, contractual negotiations. So this is probably not a bad time. We'll be heading into that within the next, 18 months. It will really, like, probably, 9 to 12 months that they'll start the process. This is a good time to start taking the approach that you're talking about in Swampscott, to say, come to the table with what some things you identify or we identify as a group, and get to Steve and get to the select board with, areas you think there's places we can, maybe be a little tighter on things, and just start taking little bites at it. But, I totally understand your thought on it. Like, it's I feel like we all, whether you're in Essex or Manchester or Wenham or wherever, we're all fighting the same fight, trying to have an impact within a difficult difficult parameters that you're operating in.
Yeah, I was thinking similar of it to Deanna when a couple points as I sort of step back, and budgets are always egalitarian, right? Everybody has their last year number and you grow it at a certain percentage and you get to a level funding. But the way the taxes are set up, and I don't have the broad municipal experience to know that you basically lock yourself into a perpetuity tax increase for the next 20 years. Because if your labor has to go up 2 to 3%, your overall expenses do, you could just take that trajectory, and you'd be lucky if it's 2 to 3%. You don't have a 15% year. And there's no easy fixes on this, because many committees before me would have sort of already figured it out by now. But one of the things I sort of thought is, and it's a difficult thing to do, at some point you have to re-underwrite the money that was already put out budget by budget, right? And it's a hard thing to do, but I look at it as, okay, let's say it's a lot harder to move the tax rate down, but what's the utility of the dollars that we're spending? In other words, are we spending our collective best dollars to drive the best school system outcomes, to drive whatever you determine the hierarchy of values to the town? And that's different for every town member, right? It's going to be different for seniors as it is for school people. But you look at the collective 20 odd million and you say, are we delivering the best Wenham experience for those dollars based on the purposes of the town? What are the purposes of the town? Are, stable and strong school systems, excellent, services, maybe a combination of, is the overall sort of town moving sort of down the track in terms of the use of space, those types of things. But I sort of, as a new person on the committee, I've had the same sort of question and Jeff, you probably have the longest, Jeff Szilard, you probably have the longest experience being in these chairs, multiple decades and seeing how it transitions. But it does sort of seem like you're kind of locked into, when you look at your fixed expense and you look at your mix of commercial to residential, it looks like you're locked into sort of a perpetuity increase. So at some point you have to stop and sort of say, okay, and I think you do from time to time, what's the utility of the budget? Are we getting our best? Are we putting our chips on the best, places? Or is it you just sort of spread it around, nobody gets mad, and everybody's sort of mad that taxes go up? I don't know. I sort of had a similar view. I was just trying to figure out how to sort of work these equations so you can either get more utility out of a Wenham experience for everybody, so they sort of say, I'm spending a lot, but I get a lot, right? That was where I was in Darien, Connecticut. You spent a ton on taxes, but your outcomes, everybody loved the place, right? So they weren't ready to burn it down every day. But there were challenges with that. So I sort of, I'm trying to figure out as well how do you increase either the experience and combine that with making sure that you're spending your dollars for the highest, for the highest public use, I guess.
Yeah, I mean, I think, and that, some of that gets back to communication and to, sort of to Finn's, elevator speeches or whatever about where is that utility? I mean, to your point though, David, the senior, you could, school is almost always your biggest bang for the buck, right? Because it's, people really get a lot of value out of school. And so, the most people probably feel like that's where the most utility comes from. But at the same time, when you have a senior population that's maybe a little more challenged with paying their taxes and they feel they have a Cadillac school, they might say, like, I don't think that's the best utility at all. Like you're killing me.
Right.
And it's a circular problem for them because you create higher assessed values for them by making the school system better, and therefore you spend more tax, and that tax makes them create more tax. I mean, I think one thing, I don't know if anybody had a chance, I did send out a document that deals with the general government departments. That's a little different than we've done in the past here in Wenham, but it sort of shows, actual expenses for FY 21, 22, 23, and then shows you your budgets for 24 and proposed 25. And one of the columns in this spreadsheet is to compare, sort of what does the FY 25 budget look like relative to your actual FY 23 or 23 expenses. That's the most recent year you have actual expenses on. And so, you can look and see, in some of these, budgets where, you might say,
can we pull one of those up, Jeff, while you're talking about it? Which one are you talking about? The chart that's got,
it's something called
general government 01 point.
Yeah, FY 25 general government 01.03.24.
Yeah, which columns are you looking
at? That's not something you can throw up on the screen, is it?
Probably. Let me pull it up, and then does Jeff Calder have to allow me to share screen, or can I select that on my own? Oh, okay, Jeff. Jeff just put it up. Perfect.
Awesome.
Great.
I'm like 1 for 4 with screen sharing, so I'm gonna take this win.
So it's what I find helpful about this is one of the common complaints is we build budgets on budgets, which causes things to grow exponentially faster. Because you say, well, my budget's 15,000, but if you really only spent 13,000, but you're increasing off that sort of fictitious $15,000 number, that kind of grows quickly. And so by looking at sort of like what you've spent, over what your request for 25 is compared to your FY 23 actual. So, I won't look at the select board because we know that's really driven by adding more board members, but, the town administrator's budget is up 13.91% since what we actually we expended in FY 23. So, that means, basically you went up about 7% a year over those 2 years. So maybe that's indicative of, this is an area. To me, these all just become sort of like things you can look at to say, like, is this an area that maybe I have some wiggle room. I can kind of right size this budget, and maybe instead of requesting, in this case, $160,000, maybe I could, really request, 150 and get us back, $10,000 there. I think in this particular instance, you've gone through several town administrators. It's gotten more expensive. This is a bad sort of example because it's just Steve, mainly Steve's salary and a few smaller, items. So you really probably can't change this budget that much because he does have a contract in place and whatever. But there will be other departments where we can look and say, building and grounds is up 17.89% since the actual FY23. It allows you to pick things to take a deeper dive into and say, why is that, coming in at a 9% annual increase over the actual expenditures in FY23. And so when we built this in Essex, it was to sort of try to help us, maybe do a little bit of what Dan was talking about. How do we identify where there are places where we can, go and find the budgets and true them up a little bit and stop building budgets on budgets, which does lead to the sort of that tax creep that you're talking about. It won't always be perfect. I think the town administrator example is good. Those are your real costs in the town administrator office. It's mainly salary. You're not going to be able to, without changing Steve's contract, you're not going to be able to change that much. But in other departments, you might be able to look and say, whatever, someone says we spend $4,000 on office supplies, and you look and say, well, I don't know. I mean, I look historically, and you usually spend $2,000. And there's always a few $1,000s of cushion in there. Maybe we use tools like this to try to tighten things up where we can. The flip side of that is some of those, overages are where your free cash comes from. So if you tighten up a lot of things, you're likely reducing your free cash, which isn't, that's not necessarily 100% a bad thing. But if you think of how Wenham operates over certainly the last few years, having a healthy free cash has allowed you to minimize debt service in terms of acquiring new vehicles and new equipment and things like that. It's allowed you to do some things because you've got the flexibility, because you have the free cash. So if you dwindle the free cash too much, the flip side of it might be coming to town and asking for, debt exclusion overrides, more frequently to buy things. And that's, it's not 100% the wrong thing. It just becomes a different way of operating. And as long as people understand that, I think you're fine. I mean, like, I know, sort of in Essex, it's a perfect example because based on the assessed values, $1 million of free cash equates to essentially $1 on the tax rate. So if the tax rate had been $1 lower, you would have paid your bills exactly with no excess, money available, and everybody would have had, whatever, $400 or $500, $1,000, whatever it might be in their particular case, in their pocket. So it's always a balance of, you don't want to be way over, you don't want to be taxing someone $16 as a rate when you could have gotten by with 14. But you do need to have some wiggle room in there for free cash, because you do have things that either come up that are sort of more emergency type things, or you do like to have the flexibility to buy equipment and vehicles and IT infrastructure, whatever it might be. Having that free cash does help you with that financial flexibility. But the reason I wanted to try to get this model up and running for Wenham was because I felt like that it might be a helpful tool to help you sort of identify where you think there are pockets within the budget that maybe you can find some savings.
I think it's a great tool. I think that's a great angle on it. But as you talk, Jeff, it brings you back around to David's point, or mine and David's back and forth, which is kind of the crux of the issue. It's, do we as finance committee and does the town assume increases are a foregone conclusion, and therefore we spend our time on trying to be the best stewards and best allocate or best ROI on our money? Or do we say increasing taxes over and over and over again isn't viable over the long term? It'll kill our town in that people's equity in their homes will grow slower than any other place that doesn't have the same rates, and people will continue to move. I think that's the decision we got to make. Like,
so one of the things I'm trying to figure out here is I'm thinking about the work that is supposed to be going in the master plan, and you know, what happens when you add more houses versus more multi-use properties, right? And like to break out of the cycle you're describing would have to be, you know, a major change, right? It would be, you know, all right, we're going to merge the fire departments and the police departments with Hamilton or something. It would be a large event, right?
or
To
we
break
literally
it out.
merge the town entirely with Beverly, or who knows what.
That's what I
Watch
mean.
out,
It's
Dano.
like,
I brought that up once and almost got my head ripped off.
Well, yeah, maybe we need to keep bringing it up. I don't know.
so I think your question of scope is like, what is the scope that we have here as the group to do, which is, are we working within a framework, right? Which is, we're not pushing hard for a major change or a structural change that would allow a major change in the spending, right? Maybe that's the right framework. I mean, like if we wanted to have a 30% reduction in our taxes, right, we would need to do a major, you know, facelift to the town one way or another, right? I'm not sure that you'd call that within the scope of what we're doing here.
I would jump in and say I think it can be both. I think the short term, you know, at the moment, a goal is to, as representatives and taxpayers here in town, make that judgment about whether the various departments have been good stewards of and spenders of the tax dollars that will be raised in the coming fiscal year. But at the same time, you know, I think we do have an opportunity to think and offer as an advisory committee suggestions or ideas of a broader kind of a seat change. But obviously it's not going to happen this year. But you know, I think we have the platform to do so. But the goal is, at this stage, of course, trying to make judgments about the current plan for spending. But you know, I think everybody shares that frustration because we all see our taxes going up. We want to be making certain that we're getting the best, as to David's point, you know, the best services and experience that we can, you know, for the money that we're spending. You know, we do, of course, have a reconfigured select board. So that's now gone from 3 people to 5 people. So you know, more people, more ideas. We have a brand new finance director. It's come with great experience. We have also fairly new, Steve's tenure, I think, is 1 year. You know, great experience in Marblehead, and so I think we're lining up. The town is lining up the resources to be able to think that way and hopefully maintain some stability in management that will allow for a less reactionary governing and more visionary governing. And I think that's the goal, and I think we can have a role in that if we have ideas.
I think just one thing, thinking about the role of the finance committee, and I mean, this has been true since I've been on the committee, and I have no reason to believe it's been different in the many years prior. But the committee really operates around the budgeting cycle. You know, we ramp up our meetings in December through town meeting, and then very little occurs until the following fall. And I think in terms of making recommendations that would be more impactful around fundamental changes that could be made, or new approaches to pick your department, pick your poison, it would require meeting more times during the year when we're not actually talking about the budget, which I think would be a very good thing. Because I don't think I've really ever had in 3 years a finance committee meeting that wasn't just focused entirely on the budget, as opposed to having a finance committee meeting talking about some of the things that Dan was bringing up, right? And like, how do we think about these more holistic ideas on controlling costs, or looking at, our actual spending going back several years. And so just in terms of the way the committee functions, that could also be something we think about that would enable us to get more ideas out to the select board and the community.
Yeah, the charter here in town for the select board is essentially it's the budget. It is advising on the budget, and it is in other towns more broadly focus on anything of a fiscal spending nature. So yeah, I think that's within the authority of the select board to think, could this committee have a role more broadly than the way it's currently chartered, which is essentially, as Scott has said, it's around the budget.
Yeah, I mean, I'm not going to pretend to interpret our charter, but I mean, we could still hold potential meetings throughout the summer focused on the budget, but from a more macro perspective, or even more micro. I guess it could go in either direction, but it could still be budgetarily focused. It just wouldn't put us in the situation where we're focusing on the specific budget that needs to get us to town meeting, as opposed to more planning around what are we going to do for this upcoming budget season? Like, where can we really focus on even before people start putting their plans together? We want to get this information on them and say, hey, we noticed these line items are going up. We want to talk to you before you even start putting your budget together. Just these are nothing I am saying is a new idea. I'm not gonna. It's but it is something that I know has been talked about in the past, and could provide a higher level of input from the finance committee, at least to the select board and directly to departments.
So I'd support that, but if this is a charter problem, then a conversation with the select board would make sense. And if we do have that spare, I'm not going to call it spare time, lower impact time in the spring and in the summer, to have those kind of broader conversations. We're not under the gun to approve something with a particular date, then that's the right time to do it.
Yeah, I think great ideas, and
so Dano, the other thing that that I saw in an earlier meeting, I can't remember when it was months ago now, where we were comparing our town to neighboring towns, right? And one of the ones that I spent a lot of time thinking about was the spend per citizen, right, in our town, right? And there was some discussion about how does having Gordon, those colleges in it skew our results, right? And that's the sort of benchmarking If you're like DPW, how many miles of asphalt do we have divided by how, as a denominator, and how much should we spend as a numerator? And if you find those benchmarks, right, then for each one of these rows here, you can say, look, we are matching our neighbors, right? I think what Jeff asked, what you were saying about what you've got up on the screen here, those are valuable like controls and on this too. But the idea of finding benchmarks that people will easily agree with you as the important benchmarks, and be able to say, look, we're spending the same amount of money per citizen as our neighboring towns, or whatever the benchmark is. I think that's going to be a strong signal, right? That we are like our town, like our neighbors, right? We are not going to be driving our citizens into the ground with spending any more so than, the 5 or 10 neighboring towns that we benchmark.
Well, and that, yeah, totally agree. And that was actually just recently where Steve presented that to the select board joint committee. Back to David's point about Darien, I don't know if it's Darien or Dorian, Connecticut, I'm stuck on that a little bit. Like, do we have enough scale to provide the high quality services that we might all want and would be justified? Or would you need, like, because of the small population, to Finn's point, we'd have to each pay like 5x what we're currently paying to get anywhere near the level of service that you had in Darien, Connecticut, because we're so few people.
Yeah, I mean, I think it goes back to the question of, have we gotten the maximum utility or the high-end experience for a high-end tax rate? That's the question. And is that a mathematical issue that can't be solved because it's just a scale? There's not enough commercial and there's not enough tax-paying residents when you back out Gordon and farmland and other sort of non-taxable, space. Is it just a scale issue? And Jeff Soulard, you'd have this experience from Essex, or when you really dive back into it, we should have a Chelsea Piers type, which is a sort of high-end sports complex at the Iron Rail. And should we have maybe a little bit more vibrant, downtown area, those things. I know these are sort of sacred cows and nobody wants to change the complexion of a colonial town, but if you've got to sort of decide, if you can't solve for the tax equation, I want to make sure that maybe some of the incremental things we can do in town to give people to say, yeah, you're paying a little bit more, but look what of all the things you're getting besides the picturesque land and all these other things. Here are some of the other things that we have here that maybe are a higher end experience that sort of justify, or for those people that value those things, with kids or seniors. Even something like investing in the senior center, when I walked through it, I was like, okay, you could remodel this bottom floor. It's totally unused space today that's used storing. You could remodel the top floor. You could turn this into a place where you could create a much better experience for the seniors, and you could probably do it at a very reasonable capital cost. It's not a big thing, but maybe that brings some satisfaction to a constituent in our town that's struggling with the cost, and they probably say, I get the same thing every year and my cost goes up, compounded 7% every year. And so they maybe need to see something that gives them a better sort of day-to-day life experience. I'm not sure, but these are the things I look around and say, maybe it's 4 or 5 things to do to drive the experience while we're trying to sort of massage and manage the numbers the best we can, and keep the town running well. So I just sort of look at it and say, you've got to either work the cost side, which is hard, or you've got to work the experience side. If you don't move either, then I think you get that dissatisfaction, Dano, that you're talking about. People say, well, geez, I can send my kids to private school and live in Danvers. I don't, I'm not saying that's the choice that people are making in every case, but I think, that's why probably a lot of people end up at St. John's Prep, not because we have a bad school, but they probably look at the overall cost of everything and then just say, maybe I've got to make a change. And I don't want that for the town. having gone through the school system here as well. But that's I sort of think of it as like you got to either work both angles simultaneously, but there's probably some levers that can be pulled to start driving some better experiences for the people here. So that say you want value for your dollar, right? If you pay a high end price, you want a high end product. I don't know.
David, that's a really good point. It's something I always felt was something in Essex we had to address more because the taxes were, while the rate's not as high as Wenham, the tax burden on folks is still really high, right. And I was always really aware of, in terms of the value, as you say, the seniors were really getting not nearly as much value. The council on aging wasn't very robust and right. Things like that, and to your point. I think there are sometimes things you can do where it's not a huge dollar amount, so it's not going to move the tax needle a whole lot, but you can Correct. Make a conscious effort to provide a better value to certain people. There's always going to be folks who, it's just financially it's not tenable, and it doesn't matter if they have a better experience at the senior center. But for some folks, it does matter. And I think, Finn brought up a good point, and I honestly think it's part of the reason I'm here and part of the reason, we've made some changes in the finance department is to free up time for the finance director to do more of this kind of benchmarking, which is really going to be piecemeal. Everybody likes to look at, what's our tax rate, and everybody likes to look at, what's the average, single family tax bill, and, what's the per capita cost of X or Y. But those aren't always, and something like a police department, they're for an Essex or a Wenham, there's sort of a bare minimum cost to a police department. Whether you're 3,000 or 5,000 people, you still need a chief, you still need, whatever, 3 people on per shift, you still need, whatever it might be. And, so, if Wenham versus Essex, if we're going to have a very fairly similar police department structure, Essex per capita is going to be much more than Wenham, for that kind of thing. And so, sometimes those per capita ones are really, they're a benchmark for sure, but sometimes they're not the best way, and you have to find a way to say, look, you need a police chief one way or another, and whatever the salary might be, the salary divided by 3,000 people is a lot more than it is divided by 4,000 or 5,000 people. So should you be looking at how many miles of roads do you have, or that type of stuff?
Right.
And that's why if we do sort of build out the software for the budgeting and stuff, you can really start to build that narrative, because it's really easy to say, well, geez, the Manchester per capita DPW cost is X, and in Wenham it's Y, and and you might be able to say, yeah, but we have X amount more roads, or we have whatever variables might be different that you say, you need to take a deeper look. And so I think that's part of why I'm here, is to help Steve kind of tell that story. And so, one, we want to create more value for your tax dollar for sure. We would, as Dano says, we'd like to actually reduce your tax dollars if we can do that as well. But sometimes I don't think we have to increase the actual value you're receiving in some places. We just actually need to enhance the perception of that.
Do a better job of telling the story.
Absolutely.
You talked about Essex, and the taxes are lower there, but maybe people don't know that you have to pay separately for a sticker, and then you have to haul your garbage and trash to the dump yourself. Now, we can shave some money off the DPW budget, but are people going to in Wenham put up with paying a fee for having access to the transfer station, and then throwing their trash bags into the back of their car and their recyclables, and taking them over to the transfer station? So it's part of an experience. I think that maybe some people want to go for it, but maybe some people don't. But that's the reality in that town that has slightly lower taxes.
Yeah, and I don't have. I think that's a good point, Jeff. And I don't have the pulse of the town. I can just imagine from being back recently after being gone for 20 plus years that if the costs are going up and we're not delivering materially more, and I don't have that context, so maybe we are, then from a resident standpoint, we've either got to tell that story better or get some targeted things done that we think will serve the common good, you know, to Finn and others' point that we spend some time doing some strategic things to move the ball forward, as well as doing the sort of nuts and bolts budget stuff, because the nuts and bolts budget stuff won't change materially year to year, and it's not going to lower the, you know, amplitude of people who are concerned about X and Y, because that's just not how budgets work. It's very hard to do that in any given year. It's a multi-year process, and the strategic part of delivering, and it has to be funded too somewhere, either self-funded or otherwise reallocated, is delivering that experience. Because I think a lot of people come to Wenham because they have this sort of pride. This is a special town. This is a special place. I like to live here. My kids like it here. It's, you know, has its own sort of unique New England character and identity, and I think that's why people are here. But if that identity starts to erode because the cost of staying here sort of outweighs the percepted or actual experience, that's really the risk you face, right?
And we've asked the school, both the Wenham and the Hamilton Finance Committees, to take a similar approach to the the marketing, the demonstration of whether and if and that they are good stewards of the tax dollars that each of the towns provides them. Same kind of messaging about trying to do some benchmarking. Are they as efficient as other school systems? Are they as
right,
effective?
Some KPIs,
the KPIs, right? And starting here in Wenham, with this budget cycle, we've been asking the school system to do something similar, to help people judge, whether their dollars are being well invested.
Right.
Well, I think we still have, and I like the idea. Great point, Dan, Dave, everyone, Finn, Scott, Jeff. I think we can do both. I think we ought to try to do both, because there's a growing anxiety, I think, around, as Dan has put it, this inevitability of the march of taxes.
Sorry, just for out of order, but I'd vote for a way to do both, is to take the money we're going to spend on new Glock pistols for the police and upgrade the senior center instead. Tangent, but trying to do both.
I hadn't even looked ahead. They're getting new pistols, are they?
And I will tell you, I walked through the senior center and I've done my share of building things. I saw a real opportunity there. I was like, wow, talk about a constituent that sort of feels that maybe their value for the dollar is being stretched and they're in the non-income producing part of their life. And this senior center has 2 floors that are relatively reasonably remodeled, in my opinion, and something that could be a place where it's another nice space that Wenham will own that could be nice for meetings. Maybe you could rent it out for some little like mad money to support something. It just wouldn't take much. And I looked at the building and I was like, and they're using like the bocce courts outside. And I was like, wow, I mean, it's not going to change our tax rate either way, but it felt like a high impact, low investment move that when done right, maybe you get some volunteers to give some of their time who have those trade skills. I don't know. It seemed like an easy win that would be hard to say, no, let's not. Let's leave our current space unfixed.
I would say, we just keep these ideas coming, and we will find the opportunity and the time to have an airing and a sharing of them. So yeah, thank you. Good.
Just to weigh in on what Finn said a little earlier in terms of maybe, stepping up in other times of the year to sort of, have more meetings or be more involved. After town meeting, which is, first Saturday in April, so I think it's the 5th or 6th this year, that time frame from sort of after town meeting to June 30th, as these departments are kind of closing out books and whatever, it might be a good time, that to have the liaisons for various departments or whatever, work, closely, a little more closely with those departments. That's a good time to get a good feel for what these folks are doing. It's, they're finishing up the year. You're seeing a sense of sort of what's left in the budget, and you can see how they sort of spend heading into year end, get a sense of how they, kind of approach that. I haven't been here long enough to know if you have a lot of departments that view the budget as a target, or those that, just kind of spend what they need to spend and leave the rest. But it's probably a good time to start, have a dialogue with those folks heading into year end, and then, right into as the new year starts, to maybe, have a better sense of things as you, start in the fall, as Finn was saying, with, the typical kind of budget process or whatever. But it's just sort of one idea on maybe how you could change up the approach to how you've done it sort of more historically.
Yeah, I think Scott has the best perspective on this, but my sense in the year that I've been around, it does go pretty dormant, and of course there was also a bit of turnover. So I think, with this group, I think we do, as you all are saying, and have an opportunity to stay together and take some of these ideas and think about, how we can get them the audience, and find the audience for them that they need. You want to take on the infrastructure, IT infrastructure?
Sure. You want to, there's a PDF for that if you want to pull that up and throw it up on the slide for folks to see, like you're showing this one.
Is that part of
just
this?
a question on timing, Jeff? I know I derailed us a little bit to start, but are we aiming to be finished by a certain time tonight? Is there a certain amount of business we got to get through?
Yeah, I think I'd generally like to keep them under or at 2 hours. How does 8:30 work for everyone?
Sounds great.
Okay. Let's see. What you're talking about, Jeff, is not within this slide, is that?
No, it's on that same email. There's something called the information technology budget, another PDF.
Let's see if I can find that one.
But yeah, that's obviously an area where we're seeing a pretty significant uptick over the over the FY24 budget. But actually, if you look at the actual expenditures from 23, it's there you go. I don't know if you can increase the view on that.
Yeah, I'm trying to. Doesn't seem to be. Oh, okay, that looks bigger. Is that the whole slide?
Yeah, that's the whole slide there.
Okay.
I don't know if folks can. It's a little small on my screen, but my eyes are getting bad. But essentially, the budget for IT was 119,000 in FY24. Mainly contracted services at 105, and then about 13,000 of just kind of capital improvements. This year we level funded those two items for 2025, but we've got a few things that are rolling on I think Steve spoke about this at the meeting on the Saturday on the 16th. We've had to migrate to the Office 365 environment to deal with our email and things like that. And so there is, the costs associated with that are about $24,000 for this year, as we finally kind of ramped up that entire conversion of the Office 365 suite. Then we are looking at moving over to a fee for the Danvers data center, which is what Steve spoke about in terms of, rather than building out a $250,000 data center, you're giving $10,000 to Danvers. They're building one on your behalf. They have some scalability because they're doing this for, Essex and a lot of other communities. And apparently are actually moving from actual physical data sites in Danvers to more of a Amazon Web Services sort of platform. That should actually, further help them, minimize costs moving forward. So that's a $10,000 investment, which is, clearly preferable to, building out our own data center. And, I can tell you that, Essex was sort of one of the early adopters in this. And, it's been a very cheap solution for us. And it's been a very stable and, useful solution for us. So I would, wholly endorse that. We've actually got something in the budget here.
Can I just jump in? I'm sorry. So this will replace our own servers. Is that essentially what's going on? So Wenham acquired servers, have been running them, have been trying to keep them going. This will essentially take over that process. So absent moving to the contract with Danvers as a data center, we'd be looking at capital expenditures to upgrade the servers in Wenham. Is that fair?
Absolutely. So most of our servers here are, in the 10-year-old range. They are slow. It's very noticeable when you're working here at times. They are definitely at end of life. I think Finn has a bit of a tech background. He could maybe speak to it more, but yeah, 10-year-old servers is, definitely at the far end of the useful life. So yeah, you would clearly be looking at, Steve says the one he built in Marblehead was, over $200,000. I don't know that ours would be that expensive, but it would certainly be in the tens of thousands of dollars. In the 50-ish range or more for sure. And I don't know enough about it to know the exact cost, but clearly it's something, I would think over 50,000. And then you're replacing those servers again in 5 years ideally. So going to a sort of an annuity cost of it's $10,000 a year to Danvers, and they're maintaining it and they're handling the the security of it and all these different things. It works out really, really well. And as I say, in Essex, it was great. You could just, anytime there was an issue, you're on the phone to Danvers and they're already working on it and they're maintaining the physical hardware, and things like that. So it's, I think it's clearly the way to go. I think more and more communities are going to be doing it. And, a $10,000 a year, expenditure, an actual operating expenditure rather than big capital every 5 years is probably a switch worth making, I would say.
So yeah, I don't think anybody's going to debate that. I don't think we have to belabor that, right?
I'm going to support the data center at 10 grand. We'd have to hire somebody to run a data center, which would be more than 10 grand, let alone the material, the equipment. So,
hey, Jeff, should we be looking at these budgets really over like a 7-year average versus like year to year? Because if we have episodic sort of technology upgrades every 5 to 7 years, I don't know if your experience with Essex, what's the right way to look at it, at tech spend?
I think you're probably onto something there in terms of that's probably a pretty, 5 to 7 years is probably a good look back. But what I would say here is, I don't know. I think it's been really piecemealed here in Wenham. So I don't know if our 7-year experience is, really that helpful to look at.
Right.
But the theory is right.
Okay. Yeah, we might be on a 10-year cycle.
Yeah.
Just a question. I know you, obviously you guys have done all kinds of diligence, but what I'm struggling with a little bit is a simple analogy. Like in my world, I've got 80 people who have Office 365 subscriptions, got website stuff that's hosted at Amazon Web Services, got backup in place. We've got HIPAA security level in place. And there's just, it doesn't seem it's that, I don't know, the all in, I think I'm getting lost maybe in the $167,000 number. I know that's more than just, that's a few other things, but like the ongoing monthly to support 80 users with what I just described is not that much. So I think that's where I'm stuck. Like, what are we spending all the contract services money on?
So do you have an IT person?
We got an outsourced IT guy for a couple $1,000 a month, but he really doesn't have to do anything because it's all pretty fire and forget. I mean, we don't have a lot of intensive help desk stuff going on. And
yeah, I mean, the largest part of that 105 for the contract services is essentially the outsourced IT folks.
That's 10 grand a month for how many users do we have?
I would, off the top of my head, wouldn't know, but I would say I would guess that somewhere in the 100 plus range. I would think. I don't know how many people have.
I mean, that's another thing. Like, I don't need a Wenham license. I don't know why we would be paying Microsoft for me to have a Wenham license.
Yeah, I mean, that's actually a question I had is, if we, in the old days and, sort of in Essex, when we weren't on the Office 365 environment and stuff, it literally cost us like, 50 cents a month or something to have an address for me at Essex, ma.org. Maybe that's something we need to look at is, should we be having, a mailbox for every select board member, every FinCom member, every planning board, whatever, like that might be a, maybe I haven't been here long enough to know if there's sort of a, oh no, nobody wants to use their personal emails or, everybody wants to have a Wenham email. But yeah, that to me is an area where this Office 365 thing is a new, this is new, and so it's a lot more expensive to have people. I know in Essex when we just had to kind of go through a similar thing, when you get that email address, Dano, it comes with like the whole suite, so it's like, yeah, you certainly don't need to be paying for the suite for someone who's like a temporary, a board member necessarily.
Well, we've also got the massive malicious mail, anti-spam, whatever in the background running and other things that we're paying for that. Anyway, I just don't know how. Again, I want to trust you guys have done due diligence, but at the same time, if you're not an expert in the field and you got the expert comes along and says, this is what you need, and everybody's, there's ransomware and there's everything else out there, then we pay for what we need. And a lot of times it's not, we don't need it all. So I don't know.
Yeah. And we're actually getting that stuff, ransomware, and a lot of the firewall stuff is we're part of a sort of regional grant that allowed all of us to go. Essex did it, Wenham's done it, I think everyone around here has done it. We're all on the Danvers platform through Fortinet with a whole bunch of that ransomware protection and physical firewalls and all those different things. We're getting those. I wonder, the 105 for contracted services, I do wonder if there's a bit of a, the investment in the new data center might actually minimize those charges. My sense is that Tom probably is working on our stuff a lot more frequently because it is old and is being, the issues are coming up more frequently. So I sort of expect that maybe that 105 number should sort of come down as you migrate to these new servers, and that should help minimize things, I think, going forward. But I think it's a great point, and certainly, like, if there are people, I mean, that's the beauty of having all these people on boards and whatever, is if there's someone that has a little bit more IT background or whatever, and can kind of bring to the table what you just did, Dano, where you're like, hey, I got 80 users and I'm, this is my cost. Why is it so much more There's always sort of a bump for municipalities. They tend to have, things can be more expensive for different reasons sometimes. But yeah, if you're telling me you're spending 75,000 and we're spending, 167, maybe there's, someone has the expertise to help us, kind of minimize that.
Ben, you look like you've been about to say something.
No, I'm just, I don't know. I'd be fine with not having, the email, the Wenham email. Someone must have made a decision about security or something like that. Said we all have to be on this.
Yeah, it was risk mitigation, I think. Like, oh, well, if someone ever sues you, then they can, you have to submit all your
might
emails
have
and all
something to
that.
do
But
with open meeting laws, that if we're all communicating with a town website or email address, then they can see that we're not meeting outside these public forums. Yeah, I guess that's
Yeah,
risk
that's a big part of it.
mitigation as well.
Yeah, and maybe there's workarounds to that. I mean, I know in Essex, a lot of times, a lot of us would do, it would be, like I'd create, something like whatever, Soulard Essex FC, at Gmail, and that was the only, I bifurcated my CPA practice from, the Essex stuff by doing that. And that's, certainly a cheaper solution than a full Office, 365 license.
it's just kind of back to the same, like, do you approach it from the standpoint of how do we minimize costs? And I know you guys have been working on a shoestring, and the carpet and the toilets don't work and everything else. I don't mean that, but I mean, we need to be secure and we need to follow the rules. But anyway,
I think it's a good point.
I got a guy that's a local Wenham, citizen who's amazing, who could help assess at least. I'd love to just even get him. I bet he'd do it pro bono if there was any chance of the contract being available or coming up anytime soon. He'd be willing to go in and just look at what you got for architecture and give you his 2 cents on the way to do it the most efficient way.
Yeah, I mean, I think certainly putting that name in front of, you can send it to me, I can send it to Steve, or we can try to arrange a meet or whatever. But, I'm sure Steve would be 100% open to something like that.
Cool.
There's only a couple more things on here. I mean, we had a couple more things. We need to do an upgrade on the website with Civics Plus. That's who runs the town website. That's a $5,000 charge to redo the site. And then there's this budgeting software we've been speaking about that's in here at about 10 grand, which, in the quote we just got, that might prove to be a little bit light, depending on how many of the modules we want to use. I think that's a question. I was talking to Steve about it today, and the more modules you use, obviously the more expensive it is. And it's sort of this balance of, do you try to minimize the cost of the budgeting software up front, that'll make it more palatable. But by doing that, if you don't, take a couple of the modules for like capital planning or something like that, does that make the end product not quite so good? And then people, sort of feel like, well, this doesn't do everything you said it would do. The difference is really between, say like 10 and like $17,000 all in. But I think that's a discussion, whether it's, the finance committee or, finance committee and the select board sort of have to kind of come up with an approach on that. Like, what do they think is the most viable approach that would, be the most likely to provide bang for the buck and get residents to buy in. My worry would be if we spend too much and then people say, geez, I thought I was going to do all these different things, and it doesn't end up delivering. I don't know that $7,000 of difference is, really moving the needle for a lot of people, but it might for some. I don't know. So, I sent the quote in the email, and there's also a couple of links in there. One of them is for a community out in California. And I think it's a 380-page PDF or something, which I mentioned in one of our other meetings, that, I think these things can be a little bit, overwhelming. I think we have the ability to tailor them so that they're sort of manageable, that people will be like, oh, I can read a 90-page report or something with some graphs and things, versus if they see 380 pages, they just, walk away. But I also sent the link for Manchester, Mass, which is actually kind of, I like this a little better because it's interactive. And so you go to sort of a home page, and then there's tabs, and there's sort of a like the budget, the budget introduction memo, and then you click on a tab that shows you, by department budgets, or by fund or grant fund or whatever. So it's a little bit more manageable, because it's it's sort of like 5 tabs that then have some sub menus, so people can really drill down and see different things. I mean, some people might want to see everything from soup to nuts, but other people might just be like, I want to understand the school better, or I want to understand the police department better, or whatever. So I think that, if you click on that Manchester link, I think, that's a really useful tool. And I think that's probably similar to what, we envision kind of building out. So, again, these are all capital things that are going to be discussed next week at the selectman's office as kind of the kickoff, or at the select board's meeting as a kickoff. But certainly worth, like a lot of we literally just got all the capital stuff earlier today, so I threw it all in an email so you folks had it. But we really didn't have a chance to compile anything on it or anything yet. But it's something that between now and next week when the select board meet, someone's already picked up on the Glocks. There's a bunch of things people can look at and see, where are we talking about spending money on capital.
And then just maybe final point on the budget software. Is that every year, 10 grand a year, or is that 10
Yeah,
grand?
so it is an ongoing, it is, in Essex, we looked at this a few different times, and it's always been just a little too expensive in our budget to sort of justify it. So, there would be
impressive. I was looking at Manchester's, I think, last week, and yeah, it's pretty slick.
Yeah, but it would be, just to put it in perspective, I mean, we're sort of paying somewhere in the range of $18,000 to $20,000 for our actual accounting software right now, and you're talking about, $10,000-ish, dollars to, have something that takes that data and puts it into, pretty interactive, slides and things like that. Not saying it doesn't have any value, but it's sort of interesting, when you're like, geez, it's, almost as much as the whole accounting suite. But at the same time, where the accounting suite is, cheaper than what we would get if we were using something newer, and sort of more modern, or whatever. But yeah, that would be an annual expense once we've, there's some upfront costs to get the installation done and the kind of conversion into it or whatever. But after that, it's just, going to be the $10 to $15,000 for the annual, software contract.
So it doesn't, we're going to continue to do the accounting and the bookkeeping the way we're doing it. It doesn't do anything with how we do our accounting and bookkeeping processing.
No, it's almost entirely it's just for the budgeting process, the budget season. And then, I would say really the biggest driver is it's putting the budget into something much more manageable for folks and allowing them to get at, the budgeting information, in a much more usable way. But even like the Cadillac municipal accounting software, which is a program called Munis, none of them have a component that has this sort of like end user budget, package. What this does is it has sort of a bridge to your accounting software. Once they've got it set up, it all dumps right into the system for the budget software. But yeah, it doesn't add any utility to your day-to-day accounting practice.
But it is budgeting planning tool. It's not just presentation. It's what you would use.
Oh yeah, no, it would replace, like, if you think of what we're using for, I set up the SharePoint, budget spreadsheets and all that. It replaces that part of it, which is, now is just a manual process of, you do a data dump out of the accounting system, you put it into some spreadsheets. But it's all, the one thing is it's sort of a closed end system. So, what can tend to happen in budget season is, oh geez, did I saved the wrong version, or I didn't update a formula, I didn't do something that kind of throws off the budget in all these spreadsheets that we pull together. This minimizes the chance for those type of errors, so that there's a big value to that as well, I think. And everybody can see it in real time too. I mean, just like they can see all the department heads received a link to the SharePoint, and they can see all these spreadsheets in real time too. But this just I think works a little bit better. So it will certainly help the budgeting process and reduce errors and make it move a little bit more efficiently.
Moving along, maybe just a little commentary about the employee benefits line item, which is showing about a 10% increase year over year.
Yeah, and the biggest driver on that,
OPEB is at 11%. So again, we're looking at items within the budget that are outstripping our ability to raise taxes, assuming kind of against
yeah. And I mean, so you're sort of where when you think of employee benefits, so like you say, they're going up about 9.9% in total, and that's mainly because we're hearing from our insurance broker that you're looking at something in the neighborhood of a 10% increase for this year. And then the retirement board, we've been told in the past to expect essentially to be on a path to full funding of the pension. You're looking at a 10.3% increase year over year, to get there by 2033 or 34, whatever the target date is there. So those are two huge drivers, which those are, essentially those are both $1 million items that are looking at 10% increases. And that's the biggest driver there.
And I think this is where the benchmarking is really helpful. We were talking about this a little bit earlier, and where does Wenham stack up in terms of its offering of benefits, compared to surrounding towns?
Yeah. So what I can tell you there is, so basically Wenham so most of the communities around use the Mass Interlocal Insurance Agency, MIA, as the agency they use to get their health insurance. And so most of us use that. And, so we all get sort of similar, letters or emails from MIA each, December and January saying, expect an 8 to 10% increase, or 7 to 9, or whatever it might be for the year. Essentially the insurance and, Wenham is pretty similar to what Essex offers. Both towns have pay 75% of the insurance premium. The employee pays 25%. From what I can tell, the Essex plan is a little bit more robust in that there's less co-pays and deductibles on the Essex plan than there is in Essex. So I think the plan ends up being a little cheaper to the town because you're obviously reducing premium costs by spreading out, higher deductibles and higher co-pays. But that's pretty common. I mean, most Essex was at a 75-25, probably 12 years ago. And we were sort of ahead of the curve. In fact, we were sort of the leverage that was used to bring our school district that was at like an 85-15 down to 75-25. But I think that's where most people are sort of living right now. As contract negotiations come up, it's going to become part of the discussion, right? If people are saying, well, whatever, we want a 4, 5, 6% COLA, the town's obviously going to push back and say, well, then we want you to pay, 30% of the insurance premiums, or, there's going to be, back and forth on this. But in my limited experience in the towns I know and working on the Essex budget for years, I would say the 75-25% split is fairly common. I know some communities and certainly some school districts, I can say the Manchester Essex School District is very actively shops each year for health insurance. And it's one of the ways, like, they sort of have attacked their OPEB liability at that school district by attacking the cost of the premiums. Most folks are attacking it by trying to fund OPEB. They're taking it from sort of the other angle. And so, but that's, they had to collectively bargain that, and we would too. You can't just, say, well, you currently have Blue Cross 75% paid by the employer. And now we're, changing you to a much different, Harvard Pilgrim, HMO plan that is, not as robust and, is going to cost a little more and whatever, that those are changes that you have to negotiate and whatever. So that's, I hear from people a lot, maybe that's what towns should be doing. And so I think those things are always, they're always on the table. But there's also a cost to trying to, really go hard after reducing this health insurance cost. You might be giving things up in other places. And typically what you hear from the unions is they're willing to maybe forego a bigger COLA or other benefits to, to keep, better insurance. I can say in Essex, because they tend to pay much less, they've always been, they always have said, we'll stick with, the Blue Cross, and the 75% match and the lower deductibles, because we realize that's the offset of we pay less across the board on all these positions. But, certainly the finance committee could talk to Steve and the select board about, should we be looking at, different plans, different companies, that type of thing. But you'd want to hear from them sort of what the limitations to that are in terms of collective bargaining and just sort of the general kind of feeling of the two parties of, what's the agreement, in terms of, we take less, but you provide better insurance, or, whatever, maybe they're ready to make a switch there. But there's nothing out of the norm, I would say, compared to our peers, but, it's definitely an area you could attack, but there's other sides of it.
Getting back to earlier points, if we're going to move the needle on the amount of tax that is paid in town, it needs to be focused on the larger expense items. If you take the schools out, benefits represents over 20% of the rest of the budget. So it's a really significant line item.
Right. Yeah, there's no question. So it's, I mean, those are, like, to get back to Dana's earlier point. I mean, if you want to say we want to actively reduce taxes, this is where you're going. I mean, and group insurance, you can address
the growth, right? I mean, that could be a goal. It's not actually rolling back taxes. Let's slow the growth.
Yeah, have a 1.5% year, have a 1% year. Optimistically, I think there's been a lot of turnover and sort of turmoil and whatever in Wenham for a few years now. And, I would hope as, we can maybe keep a team in place a little longer, keep, finance committees and select boards together a little longer, maybe you can start to sort of, eat away at some of those things. I mean, we had a fairly stable group in Essex, and over the years, I mean, we've had a few years where the town came in at 1%. I mean, the school drove us to still a 3.5-4% increase for the town, for the overall, but the town itself was coming in at 1% with all these challenges with health insurance and retirement and things like that. So, it can be done. So I'm hopeful that it can be done. But yeah, these two things, I mean, you either have to change your offering on insurance, and or with the retirement payments, you need to trim headcount basically. And if you trim headcount, that would obviously help the health insurance number as well. But the retirement number is going to grow. The only upside on the retirement is we belong to the Essex Regional Retirement System in Essex County. They are on, like almost every other pension, board in the state, they're on a path to, being fully funded, within the next, 10 years. In theory, when you reach that fully funded status, these 10% increases should slow down. I mean, once you're fully funded, you shouldn't need to have such dramatic increases each year to reach that, to continue to, keep things funded and, completely funded.
All right. Yeah, thank you. Moving on to the next item, is it too soon to be talking about, well, I guess we kind of are if we're looking at the budget, capital budget, yeah, possible uses of our free cash number. And I think you've told us before, Jeff, that while not certified, pretty confident that's coming in somewhere between 2 and I think the earlier estimate was 2.5. So it's somewhere
Yeah, I
in
mean we're at two, just under, just around 2.4 was the first number when I kind of walked in the door. It was lower than we expected. There was a variance with our books and the state's books. I think we actually made some progress this week working with the auditor to kind of figure out what the gap is. We did find something, that something wasn't booked sort of the right way back in, probably around town meeting back in April, that there's $200,000 that it's that article, Jeff, you and I spoke about, where we thought it was going to be a debt item for $200,000 with the capital, but because you found out you had so much free cash, you actually switched and used $200,000 of free cash, and that wasn't captured back then correctly. So I think that's might be a $200,000 hit that would take us from like 2.4 down to say 2.2. But then I found something earlier today that I think is going to probably get us back about 125 of that. So, I would say at this point, 2.2 should be our low water mark. And, I'm hoping it gets us close, we get up closer to 2.3. But they've, just to give people, a better understanding of it, they've vetted pretty much everything, and they've kind of looked at all the other stuff that's needed to verify free cash. And these are just these last couple points that we're hammering out. But, we took a longer look when I got here, and instead of just saying, just certify the lower number, we just wanted to look at it. And now we've kind of found the few things. Unfortunately, they didn't go in our direction. We were hoping we might find, extra money there, but it looks like the DOR is probably right. But, you still have, even at 2.2, that's a pretty healthy balance to be addressing for free cash, to address capital, and also to address, and it kind of goes back to Dano's point of, if we're looking to slow or minimize, the growth of tax, throwing some of this free cash money into some sort of stabilization or, reserve funding, that can help us mute some of the, the things that do come up. Like when we talk about, the apportionment at the school shifting and when I'm picking up a bigger share, you can set aside funds to, account for that, because you want to do that in the years when you are on the better end of the school budget. That you can put some money aside so that it'll be there when the apportionment goes the other way.
Yeah, I don't know if I did the numbers completely correct, but I think directionally so. I assumed that the 2021 year, which showed a decrease in the enrollment in Wenham, drops off, because it will in the 3-year rolling average. We don't know what the coming year, I think October is the date when they do the measurement, but we can see what October 2003 is. If there's no change in the student population and distribution of students between Wenham and Hamilton in 24, and when 21 drops off, there's going to be a 0.19% shift toward Wenham. This current fiscal year that we're looking at, I think, is a 7 basis point shift away from us. There'll be a 19 basis point shift toward us, which
is nearly a point.
I did the math on it, and it's like $65,000 in a year or two when we're going to start paying for the athletic field. So I think that adds another $5,000 or so. So we're probably talking about 70 grand shifting toward Wenham if those numbers do not change. So yeah, to your point, if there is excesses that we can set aside today to try to smooth out some of that, probably a good idea.
This is a real, this gets back to the very beginning when I brought this up, the whole free cash flow. I know if I put it in really blunt terms, it almost feels like we over budget so that we can have excess funds to use for projects that we think are good, that we don't have to get approval from the town. We don't have to go back and get approval from the town for. I know that's
Well, you
not.
still have to go back and get approval. You have to go back for a vote to use the funds. But you're right. I mean, that's always the argument with free cash is you are over budgeting so that you have money available for other things. The other side of that, though, is, you're also over budgeting to some degree because, the town isn't like a normal company where, you set a budget at your company and, for whatever reason, things aren't going a certain way. And, you need to, raise more revenue or whatever. And so if you make widgets, you can, increase the cost of your widgets. You can, you can take out a credit line. You can do a bunch of things to sort of get through sort of a rocky period. But if you're a town and you set a budget and something goes, sort of awry and you need more money, the only way you can get more money is to go to actually call a town meeting and then say to the town, geez, these 4 or 5 things happened, and my God, we need $150,000 or $200,000 or something like that. Which you may or may not get. The town may say, yeah, you came to us in April and said you needed $20 million, make it work. So you usually, towns typically have a little bit of cushion in there just for sort of emergencies and whatever. And having the free cash is a nice, offshoot of things, because you can then pay for capital that is coming or whatever. But yeah, it's a balance of, like, right now, let's just say we have $2.2 million worth of free cash. The one key point is we're not generating $2.2 million of free cash off of a $24 million budget, which should, essentially be generating 10% free cash. We've rolled over about 1.2. So we're generating, say, $1 million of free cash over a, say, $24 million budget. So you're in the range of, a 5% free cash generation, which, the DOR is asking you to target somewhere in the 4 to 6% range. So, based on how the DOR advises us to do business, we're not way outside the scope of what they, sort of are wanting you to do. But it's a constant sort of discussion because, yeah, like when residents are feeling overtaxed, they don't, $1 million is a lot of money. And you sort of feel like I'd rather have that in my pocket than the town's pocket. But there's
the DOR advises that for all the rainy day reasons that you talked about that you can't plan for, like you need the credit line or you got to make more widgets. You can't do that. So the DOR says to plan for some 5%. That sounds great. So your reference though to the stabilization fund or something, like when we don't need that 5% for some rainy day thing that we didn't calculate, we shouldn't then go and use it for something that is a nice to have that we weren't planning to budget in our budget originally. It'd be nice if we could get Glocks or we can get new scuba gear, or we can do whatever we need to do, but we didn't budget for it. So let's set aside the 5% then, to your point, and be good managers. Let's not use it every year for stuff we want to use it for.
Yeah, we can't pull kids out of the school system. That's happening. That's done, right? We're going to get that shift of expense. So can we smooth that out and hold it in these other reserves? That the finance committee and others have greater discretion over the spending of. I think is what Jeff has been advocating for. And also trying to tighten up on some of the excess in some of the budgets that will bring that free cash number a little more in line with what it's the target is to maintain year over year, and maybe a little room to skinny up on those budgets.
Yeah, I mean, if we rolled over $1 million, if we gave that $1 million back to the town, quote unquote, in some form or fashion, talk about PR, that would feel good, even if it's only minimal. Anyway, it's a tangent. We don't have to spend time on it. I just feel like
and one thing I don't know is in my quick review of, a couple of town meetings or whatever, it does seem like, it doesn't seem like a lot of stuff gets voted down at town meeting in Wenham that I've seen. Maybe historically it has, but the few meetings I looked at. But I know in Essex, there's a lot of things that go on the budget to be, projects or capital projects for, free cash that the residents do shoot down. They do say, I always refer to it as the wants and the needs when I was on the finance committee. The new backhoe might be a need, but maybe the Glocks are sort of a want. Like the weapons you have now are perfectly fine. I just don't even know enough about this right now because it's a new request. But I think that is the nice part of town meeting, is if you kind of break things up, you do have the ability to say, that's a need, that's a need. Those two things are wants. I'd rather see that money, like you say, be put away for a rainy day or used to to lower the tax rate, that type of thing. I mean, I don't know if it feels like I'm, working against you at all or whatever, but like, I agree with a
No,
lot
no,
of
no, it doesn't. It's not at all. But you're right. We don't vote things down. It doesn't seem like. Maybe that's something structural, or I don't know.
Yeah, I don't know. It's a very, it's sort of very unique. I mean, so coming over here, there's some very, each town has a different personality and different things that are important to them and whatever. So it's interesting to go from one town to the other and like CPA, for example. So we have the CPA in Essex. We have it at, we only do it at a 1.5% surcharge, and when we do it at the max, 3.5 or whatever. And in Essex, we just keep accumulating this money because there's no huge rush to sort of spend it, to the point where I was sort of starting to advocate, like, I think we should shut this thing down. Like, we may as well give the residents a break. It's only, on my tax bill, maybe my CPA tax is, $100 or something, but what the heck, if it's just accumulating, I'd rather have the $100 in my pocket. Versus here in Wenham, the CPA is like really important, and the group does all kinds of great projects and spends on a lot of different things that, it's sort of like coming from a different town. You feel like, wow, that would never go in Essex, but it's important here, and I'm sure there's things that are the exact opposite. But yeah, like, I mean, I feel like there are things town meetings should be shooting down, right? I mean, every department has the right to say we'd like to get these things or we need these things. But at the same time, the town should have the ability to say, you know what, I don't feel like that's a need, and sometimes it might just be, you and a few people that feel that way, or, maybe it's, once a few people sort of start questioning it, other people say, like, I think we can wait a year or two before we get the new such and such, or, it's great when residents who understand things, someone who's in the, whatever, they own a landscaping company or, some kind of earth moving company or whatever. And, you have the town getting up and saying, we need a bobcat or a such and such. And, you have someone who has some background that maybe comes to meetings or whatever, it comes to town meeting and says, that doesn't make a lot of sense. That's too big for the sidewalks. It's, it'd be a nice toy for you to have, but you don't really need it. So I don't know how much that goes on in Wenham, but that it can be frustrating when you're on the inside, but I think that's a really healthy thing.
So can you help me remember how this process works with the town? The I get the sense that the budget is mostly an up or down vote, and there are a number of particular questions asked beyond that, or like specific to major projects. The citizens who come, they're allowed to put a hold on a particular line item and ask for more information. And I suppose they could get upset enough to vote no, or get enough people upset enough to vote no on the whole budget. But it isn't like the line item veto that that we've you've heard at the federal government level that got shot down as well. It's sort of like it's all or nothing. I've never kind of heard about a, like, all right, we're suddenly the moderator is going to have a ask for a vote for one line item from all the citizens to reduce to cut out the firearms replacement or something.
Yeah, and so that's that's going to fall under sort of the capital article, which certainly that might be whatever whatever, it's $500,000 in total or $1 million, whatever it might be, and there's 6 or 7 things, and like you say, someone can say put a hold on the weapons or put a hold on the backhoe or whatever it might be. It works a little different in Wenham and in Essex. We do these articles, and then you can't hold on like particular line items. You literally have to make an amendment to the motion and say, like, let's just say the operating budget's 20 million. You need to like make a motion that says, make a motion to only make it 19 million and remove the, whatever the items or item might be. In Wenham, it seems like there's a lot of these holds, but ultimately more information is provided and people, kind of move forward. But in theory, you could, have a hold on an item, and then at the end of the discussion, the room sort of says, yeah, I don't think we need the backhoe. So we're going to vote, $162,000 less or whatever it might be. Again, it doesn't seem like that happened. The hold process seems like it happens pretty frequently. But the actual like bringing it to fruition and voting a smaller budget doesn't seem to happen all that often from what I can see.
Okay, that makes sense.
The operating budget will be a warrant article. The use of free cash will be a separate warrant article. And I believe the capital is a separate warrant article. We didn't actually have to do that last year. We did all our spending through ARPA funds and through free cash. So I want to be mindful of time. Just looking very quickly at this, hopefully you see it up on the screen now. Projected spend for capital monies, either borrowed or through free cash. Thought we would not go through them because, again, being mindful of what the time is. But each of these departments, we will have an opportunity to speak with in the coming weeks. So DPW, fire, library, and police are each going to join us, and we can have our questions, ready to ask them to provide their justifications, explanations for why these items, why these dollar amounts, and why now. So, these will be coming up in the next few weeks, unless anybody had a specific question about anything on it now. But I think it's probably worthwhile to hold until we have those department heads in front of us.
Yeah, and just to get, circle back to the beginning a little bit and talk about, trying to keep taxes down and whatever. I'll point out on the spreadsheet you're looking at here that shows, roughly $1 million worth of capital requests here. You'll see towards the bottom under vehicle and equipment, there is the DPW has a line item there for the Bobcat. That was a $75,000 item based on sort of the long range capital plan that, we carry a 5-year capital, improvement plan. And that was on there for $75,000 for this year. It was expected we would need that, and Rich from the DPW actually weighed in today and said, that was on there, but, frankly, the machine is running well. It's probably another year or two out. So, pull that out. So, I do think it's important for, residents and folks to realize that, we do have people that are, they are taking that fiduciary responsibility seriously. Rich isn't just saying like, well, hey, they said I was entitled to a new Bobcat this year, so I'm taking it. He is looking at that and saying, you know what, we can push that a couple more years. Or, he also had, was expecting he was going to need a 2-ton dump truck this year, which is pretty expensive. I mean, I think, well over a couple $100,000, like 250 or so, vehicle. And we have right now 3 of them. So one of them needs to be replaced, but they've made the decision that, they can actually downgrade that to what you see there at the $115,000. He said, look, the reality is, you really need the big trucks during snow season and a little bit here and there during the year. But for the most part, right now he's looking at those 3 of these big dump trucks, the 2-ton dump trucks, sitting in the yard all year, kind of just not doing anything. And so, he said, let's buy us, instead of having 3 of these bigger ones, let's buy, replace one with a smaller one this year. That's, really half the, the cost. And we can get more utility out of, all year round. So, there are little things, but I think it is important for people to know that, your DPW director isn't just walking around thinking he has a blank check. He is looking at these things and saying, where can I push something out? Where can I use something that's cheaper or has more utility or things like that? And, in my short time frame, I know talking to like Eric in the water department and, a little bit to the fire folks, they all have that kind of same approach. So I think, hopefully we can get that message out there too, that, even though things are always going up, there are folks who are trying to look at ways to minimize that as well.
I've heard the fire chief say that the ambulance that the town has, he was able to find because as a demo that the whoever the salesperson was that was selling these ambulances had it as a demonstrator essentially. And he'd somehow gotten wind of the fact that this guy was willing to upgrade his demo to another piece of equipment, and he kind of swooped in and was able to get.
I mean, we bought that for $49,000. That was
Yeah.
a $150,000 piece of equipment.
Right. Yeah. So to your point, I've heard other stories similar to those that we do have people that are trying their darndest to work within the limited means that we can offer. So moving on, then we'll cover off on the capital budgets with the department heads as we see them in the coming weeks. Why don't we, with just the last couple of minutes remaining, hopefully you all had a chance to take a look at the minutes from the meetings of the 13th and the 20th. If anybody offers any comment or correction or edit to either of those. Okay.
I have to abstain since I wasn't there, so.
Yeah, hearing none, then why don't we take a look at the December 13 minutes, and if somebody would like to make a motion to approve.
This is Finn. I'll make the motion to approve.
Okay, do we have a second?
I'll second the motion.
Thank you. Any comments? Correction, edit, change? Hearing none, then let's vote. All in favor of accepting the minutes of December 13th. Jeff Calder, yes.
Finsberg, yes.
Yes.
David Harnish, yes.
We are unanimous. Moving on to the minutes of December 20th.
I'll make that motion again to approve.
I'll second that motion.
Dano and Scott were not with us that day, so it's the three of us. So we have a motion and a second.
Yep, you have a second from David.
Great, thank you. Any comment? None. Then let's vote. All in favor of accepting the minutes from December 20th. Jeff Calder, yes.
Finsberg, yes.
Dave Harnish, yes.
Very good. Thank you, gentlemen. I will renew or remind folks of a message I think I offered at the last meeting. There is an all chairs school committee meeting coming up. Could be a good forum if anyone on the committee has any questions that you'd like addressed in that smaller format of the superintendent and the various select board, Hamilton and Wenham and Finance Committee chairs. Be happy to take those questions to that meeting, which is going to be next Wednesday on the 10th. We'll also, as a finance committee, next be meeting on January 10th. Same time, 6:30. We will have There we go. We will have addressing the group, the Public Works. So that Rich Souza will join us next Tuesday to be able to answer any additional questions we have on the operating budget for Public Works or these capital requests.
So Tuesday, did you say the 10th? That would be Wednesday.
Wednesday. Did I say Tuesday? I'm sorry, Wednesday. We will meet Wednesday the 10th as a Finance Committee. There is also a chairs meeting with the school committee on the 10th on Wednesday. So if anybody has any questions you'd like addressed to the school superintendent, happy to take those forward. We as a group of all members of finance and select boards of the two towns be meeting with the schools at the end of this month. But there is a chairs meeting coming up next week.
But your chairs meeting isn't the same time as our FinCom meeting?
Runs from 4 to 5:30, so it'll be just before.
Got it. Okay.
So just wanted to toss that out there. If we don't get as many cracks at this with the school as we do with our own departments.
And Jeff, just to for our meeting on the 10th, like you say, we're going to ask Rich Souza to come in from the DPW, but it would be helpful if folks, if there are any sort of specific questions people have about either the DPW budget, operating budget, or the capital requests, if you could run those through Jeff or through me ahead of time to sort of give Rich a heads up, so he's showing up with answers in hand ahead of time, and I'm happy to orchestrate that as well. But if you want to run that through either me or through Jeff C, that would be helpful.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, maybe similar to tonight. If I get them, or just send them to both of us, send them to both Jeffs. This will allow me to put together an agenda that is a little more detailed, which I think we need to do to inform the public about what we'll be speaking about and not being too general. So, any ideas or areas of interest within the public works budgets, please shoot those off to both Jeff Soulard and myself.
And what I'll try to do for tomorrow is to finish building out that new budget model for DPW that shows more of the historical trends and the comparisons to 2 years ago and that kind of thing. So maybe that'll help you kind of pull together any questions you have on certain areas where maybe there's some wiggle room or things like that.
Good.
Coming up on, well, actually, we're just past. Any closing comments? Any of the members? Hearing none, is there a motion to close our meeting?
I will make a motion to adjourn the meeting at 8:33.
Second?
I'll second that motion. Okay. Dave Harnish.
Thank you, Dave.
Yep.
All in favor of adjourning the Wenham Finance Committee meeting at 8:33, now 8:34. Jeff Calder, yes.
Scott Schoenberger, yes.
Finsberg, yes.
Harnish. Dave Harnish, yes.
Dan Ochikonovich, yes.
Okay, thanks everyone. Great discussion tonight. Appreciate it. See you in a week.